If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Cindy Schuler. Cindy is a seasoned veteran, having led HR practices in law firms, and she now leads the consulting practice of IntegriStar HR, where she provides guidance and best practices for HR. Cindy has tremendous expertise in fostering collaboration among different generations. That's an area that I love hearing about. Cindy, thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited to learn more about your insights and share your expertise with our audience. Would you mind giving us a little bit more about your background and career and how you came to focus on generational collaboration?
So as you said, I have been in the human resources and talent management space for more than 20 years. And it's always been an interest of mine to really look at people and what makes them click, what makes them work effectively together or not. And so it's always been fascinating to me over my 20-year career to see how people work together. So that is what brought me to the generational collaboration space.
Oh, great. So let's dig into this space. Let me first ask you about ageism, or what, probably most of us refer to it just as age discrimination in the workplace. What is that a big issue today? And what are signs that you see that a company might be having a problem with this, especially in recruiting or in the management styles?
So yes, you're exactly right. Ageism is just, it's a form of discrimination. It's a prejudice against a group of people. And it could be, we think of it in terms of older people, I think, naturally. But
it could be young,
or young. And so what I'm seeing, particularly since the global pandemic hit and hundreds, of thousands of people have left the job market, there's this huge generational gap with respect to the older generation. So what I'm seeing, there's two sides of this, right? There are folks who are older than 55 who either want to come back to work, need to come back to work, or are just looking to move to a different job or a different career, but they're nervous about what they're going to face in the workplace, whether or not a recruiter is going to look at their resume and see that they have 20 plus years of experience and discount that, or whether or not they have, for example, the technical skills, right, to keep up with the newer generations in the market. So yes, I do think that it is an issue. And on the flip side, you have companies who are looking for, quote, more dedicated and more loyal and committed people in specific positions. And what that implies is that maybe they're looking for someone of an older generation who has a different work ethic.
So what advice can you give companies and HR pros that can help them welcome people of all ages and, reduce any issues or risk that they have to be compliant?
First and foremost, I think that professional development and training in the areas of diversity and inclusion, it's imperative. It has to happen because people need to understand what unconscious bias is and other types of, bias in the workplace. The other thing is, with respect to recruiting, recruiters need to be trained. Job descriptions need to be scrubbed for bias. They need to be trained to interview all candidates, asking the same questions, regardless of their age. I think that companies need to be responsible for updating their web pages online to include people of different ages. I also think that they need to make sure that they appeal to all of the generation.
Right. So, the issue of generational understanding and collaboration, when that comes in play, there's a lot of humor, that's shared by individuals, and there's stereotyping on the internet. But, as a HR professional, what do you see behind these generalizations, and are they valid? And I think the best way for us to approach this is kind of look at the various generations. I know, for all of us, there are like 7 generations existing. Now, the oldest generation and the youngest generation really aren't in the workforce. So, and then I know there's very little of the silent generation, but the boomer generation, which, I'm a segment of, what's the misconceptions of that?
Yeah. So you touched on it. We do have multiple generations in the workplace right now. There are 5. Now, that doesn't mean that every organization has 5 different generations in the workplace, but some do. And so boomers, when you think of boomers are probably between the age of around 77 to 97 years old. And there is this perception that they're not tech savvy, but that is one of the biggest misconceptions out there. So you touched on this, that these stereotypes, right, that label each generation are just that. They're stereotypes. Now, does that mean that someone like you said you're a boomer, you may embrace all of those stereotypes or characteristics, right? You might fall into all of those categories, but not everyone does. The other thing about boomers is that people think that they are unwilling to change because they are rigid, they are value-driven, belief-driven, but that is not necessarily the case. Some boomers fear change. And so we as employers need to embrace that, right? We need to show some empathy, and we need to identify with people and understand they may need to learn differently. So there are a lot of misconceptions out there with respect to the generations.
That's great. And that boomer generation is like 1946 to 1964, I think. And now we're going to move into the Gen X, and, that's 1965 to 1980. And I know there's some perceptions out there that they're pessimistic and they're people pleasing, but help clear that up for us.
Sure. So as you said, Generation X, they're about 42 years old to about 57 years old. And Generation X, if you think about it, are latchkey kind of kids, right? There was a lot of divorce string, while they were growing up. They were home. Expected to do their homework and wait for their parent to arrive home. So they were self-reliant. And so they are a little pessimistic in terms of trusting others, right? But again, these are stereotypes. They're laid back. They're the forgotten generation. They do want feedback from employers. They want feedback, and they want to know that there is room for growth and room for promotion. And they don't feel that they have been paid attention to, so to speak.
Yeah. One of the characteristics I know, too, of that generation is many of them were born during some of the recessions of the 70s and 80s, and that certainly impacts. So let's talk about the millennials now. That's a group from 1981 to 1996, I believe, and there's some misconceptions out there. So help us unpack that.
Yes, they're about 22 years of age to 42, as you said. They are, in fact, the most likely generation to switch jobs, and 6 in 10 millennials are open to new job opportunities. But remember, they were witness of the stock market crash, the mortgage fallout, so they take responsibility for their own well-being. And it's not that they have a different work ethic. They're just the most willing to act on better opportunities.
Yeah. With that generation, in a previous company I built and led, I had a tremendous number of millennials working in there. And they stayed with us for a long period of time, many over 10 years. And I found them dedicated to working with a corporation that really identified with their purpose. So that was a strength that I absolutely saw there. So now let's move into the Gen Z. And, I know there's a thought, there's misconceptions out there about sense of entitlement and inflexible, needing high compensation, short attention spans. Unpack that for us.
Sure. So Generation Z, between the ages of, 2 and 27, they're in our workforce now, right? They were brought up post 9/11. You have to remember, they're entrepreneurial, they're very private, they're cynical, they know that life is hard and requires work. So it's not that they're inflexible. As you said about millennials, they want meaningful and compelling work in the workplace. So Gen Z is up and coming. They don't want to be associated with any other generation. They're individuals. They have their individual ideals, but they do want to know that they're doing something for a compelling reason.
Yeah, that's great. So, and the next generation after that is not in the workforce yet, and it's still being defined. And I think it's referred to as Generation Alpha. One characteristic that I've heard that is associated with this young group, which is really being born after 2013, there's a strong entrepreneurial spirit in these individuals. So it's going to be great to see that generation evolve and get into the workspace here. But let's go into how do you recommend companies create an environment, to transfer the knowledge that each generation is bringing, to the workforce. And in particular, right now, we're looking at the baby boomer generation and making sure we institutionalize and document that knowledge before they retire. What are you recommending here?
Exactly what you said. For succession planning purposes, we've got to do data dumps, right? We've got to get baby boomers and even Generation Xers to document processes and procedures. But in addition to that, we need mentors. We need for those generations to mentor the younger generations to transfer as much of that historical and institutional knowledge as possible.
So how can companies encourage employees to move past some of the preconceptions that we talked about and from the different generations and help organizations build a foster of inclusion, of collaboration, of acceptance across all ages and work styles? What do you have to provide there?
It is extremely important for senior leaders and organizations to understand that this is a multi-generational workforce. And in order for organizations to be successful, everyone needs to be able to work together effectively. And so what does that mean? In addition to succession planning, right, where we transfer information to the different generations, knowing that traditionalists and boomers and Xers will be leaving the market at some point in time, it's all about education. It's all about education. Each generation needs to understand what makes the other generation tick. We all need to be managed differently as a people. It's not necessarily just the education. It's what you do with the education afterwards. It's the action that you take.
Yeah, that's great. So I know the younger generations are really some of the strong influencers behind our work today. And what advice do you have for the older generation that are in typically positions of leadership and management? How do you encourage them to accept this and accept change and move forward with this generations?
Yeah, well, I think that it's really important for senior leaders to understand that it's time to pass the baton and that it's really important to open your mind to new ideas and different ways of doing things. And it's extremely important knowing that by 2025, most of the job market is going to be millennials. And some millennials are already leading us now. So it's a matter of really passing the baton, giving others a chance. Diverse perspectives are always better, right? And it is a proven fact that diverse teams outperform homogenous teams. So we want that diversity of thought.
That's great. And here's a something I'd heard years ago, and I'd heard that generations tend to repeat themselves. That that there are, we have these 7 generations that exist, but that they turn around and they come around, and they some of the characteristics that are really associated, they just get repeated and they carry on under a new name. Any insights you have, you can provide around that?
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And you'll see, as I said in the beginning, these are all stereotypes, right? And so there are some characteristics that carry over to the newer generations. For example, millennials and Xers, very much concerned about diversity, inclusion, social causes, and meaningful work, right? So yes, these characteristics will repeat themselves in generations to come.
Yeah, well, the great thing, I think, in highlighting the millennials that will dominate the workforce, I mean, they're optimistic. They really believe in diversity, and they go after that. So I think we'll see some great developments from the millennial generation as they rise through the leadership ranks. So that's wonderful. So, Cindy, before we sign off, I've got a question I'd like to ask you, and I ask all of our guests this question. Since S2 Verify is a pre-employment background screening company, would there be any surprises if S2 Verify conducted a background investigation on you?
I don't think I'm that interesting.
Oh, that's not true. You're very interesting, but thanks. And so there's no surprises out there.
Yeah.
Well, Cindy, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with me and our audience today. And where can our audience, keep up with you and keep track of the knowledge and insight you're providing?
Or you can connect with me on LinkedIn under my LinkedIn profile or my services page, or you can connect with me at my website at www.IntegriStarHRConsulting.com.
That's fabulous. Cindy, thanks so much. And now, a minute with Bill and Jim, my partners at S2 Verify. Let's reflect with a trend that we've seen not only for our organization, but also for many of our clients, which is the idea of their employee base going to a more remote or a hybrid environment. Have you seen changes with that as it relates to the screening services that we provide to clients? Is any issues that have developed in that element? Bill?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing more utilization of tools that are applicant-based. So it's gone from being an HR module where they're entering the information for the actual background check to being the applicant entering the information. And so a lot of that technology is moving out into the field so the applicants can do that. So we have a process where they can actually use their iPhone and actually, start in the background check, do the consents, sign the consents, complete their background check all on their iPhone. So we are seeing that, with companies moving to a more remote workforce, that, that application is taking effect in more corporations and, staffing companies and different disparate companies as well. So,
Yep. Jim, your perspective.
And in fact, I'll piggyback on that, on an earlier topic we had about kind of the HR framework. But one of the secondary challenges of the work from home, in addition to all the things that Billy's covered, is there's this tendency, those of us that doing and know this, that I'm always in my office, right? So I'm only 3 steps away, no matter where I'm at, unless I'm upstairs or downstairs. But what that really means is, and we're finding that out nowadays, we're having clients sending emails at 11 o'clock at night, midnight, 5:30 in the morning. And, I've gone through with our team that, they're kind of like, my goodness, they're in early. Well, they're not, they're working from home. And so part of what we got to be geared to, and we're getting kudos for it, crazy as it may sound, is we're responding at those hours, right? So you send me an email at 10:30, provided I'm awake, I will respond to you. Okay. Or at 6:30 in the morning, I will respond to you. It's just creating an environment where they're like, if you're awake, then I'd expect a response. So it's just a changing dynamic relative to what the traditional customer service is, right? 8 to 5 or 9 to 8 in the evening, whatever it might be. Now you're going to get queries at all times of days. So that change in putting people home and the way they're working and how they're working puts additional stress on the system.
For our audience, please tune in next week when we continue our conversation with around HR with Jill Hallwalla from Leadership Refinery. Jill will provide insight to help us reach our full potential at work. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do. Cindy, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you for having me.
If you want to stay abreast of HR recruiting and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.